In the previous video we added buttons to our GUI. In this video we will use the Grid Layout Manager to align our controls. So we'll use the Grid Layout Manager, which I really like a lot. I think it's easiest to really control the layout. We can see how easy it is to arrange our widgets using the Grid Layout Manager instead of Pack. And we can see, we will watch how automatic alignment of widgets work. And we can use a sticky grid alignment property. That'll stick it to the left side or the right side and so on. And then in the end we're going to compare TK inter buttons to the TTK theme TK inter button. So TK against TTK. Let us create two buttons, each with their own click event function. In order to use the Grid Layout Manager, we call the grid method on each of the button instances. We specify the column and row position, and it's 0 based. So column 0, row 0 is the top left corner of whatever the parent is. So in our case, our button's parent is a GUI, the first argument here. So we create a button, use grid, and place this guy in the top left corner. And then we create another one. And we also place it in row 0, but in column 1. So this one will be top left, and that one, the second button, will be right next to it. And this time, we create two separate callback functions and assign a different callback to each of the two buttons. That's more typical. Usually wouldn't have too many buttons calling the same function. So that's more realistic. So they're doing something slightly different, still writing text. So well, let's run it. And what we can see here, we have our two buttons neatly aligned next to each other. It's not that one is in the middle and the other is down here. And now when we click one, it expands itself, but it doesn't overwrite the second one, because it's grid aligned. So basically the button size defines the width of the column, and when the widget within the column gets bigger, then the column automatically expands. So there's no overwriting here. So both expand neatly, and yeah, so this is pretty much the beginning of the Grid Layout Manager. So with a very simple change, we can change our layout. So button 1 is column 0 and in position row 0, and button 2 now is still in column 1 but in row 1. So we're moving button 2 one row lower. So all we had to change is make the 0 a 1 here. We still have all the rest of the code is the same. So when we run it now, our buttons are neatly aligned in 2 rows. And the nice thing is, let's say we click this one and it expands as before, and we click this one and it's a different row, it's in row 0, but even though they're not in the same row, because it's a grid, like an Excel spreadsheet, it's a grid layout, the grid really aligns itself very neatly. So again, just changing the row 0 to row 1 and clicking the button here, everything works fine. So now we can do it the other way around as well. We say both are in column 0 now, and button 1 is in row 0 and button 2 is in row 1. So they are getting placed below each other. And when we run this, we can see they are neatly aligned underneath each other. When we click this button first, the top one, you can see how the bottom one got moved over, so it's centered within the grid. So the grid, basically the grid size has expanded. When we click this one, it pushes it further. Now this one is centered. So right now they are both aligned to the left underneath each other. When we click this one, expands the grid, and this one gets centered. The distance here is the same. Push this one. Now this one is bigger, and here it centers the top button as well. So that's really nice about the Grid Layout Manager. Now sometimes that's not quite the behavior that we want. Maybe we want the buttons always to be on the left side, or on the right side, or top or bottom. So there's a property for the Grid Manager, it's called Sticky. And the naming is like Java, West, East, South, North. So it's a string, and you can use uppercase, and so W stands for West. So we can, let's say for button 1, we want it to stick to the west, to the left side of the GUI. So when we run this, in the beginning it's the same, but when we now click the bottom button first, the top one didn't get centered. And when we click the top one, well, not much else happens. They're both left aligned. But when we do it the other way around, when we first click the one that sticks to the west, you can see how this moved over because its text property is shorter, and now it's longer too. So we can also create a regular TK-Enter button. So we can use tk.button instead of ttk button. Instead of a themed TK-Enter, we use a regular one, which is the older button. And the older button actually has some properties we can change that the themed button doesn't have. So with the button 2, we change the text here when we click it. And FG stands for foreground, so we can change the foreground color to blue, and relief is the appearance at different styles. So the TK button has these functions or these properties which the TK button intentionally doesn't have. But let's look at it. So when we run it, our second button now is the regular TK button, and our first is the TTK button. So you can see the difference. As a default, it's the same text, but this one is shorter and sticks out and so on. So this one is a TK button. That's a TTK button. So when I click this one, we're changing the foreground color of the text to blue. We could also change the background. That would be the background of the button, but I wouldn't change the text. And the relief now looks more similar to this guy. So roof. And one of the reasons why we can't easily change the TTK buttons like this is because it's a themed TK. So usually you would create a themed style and assign the whole style. So when you do that, you can change all the buttons to the same style at the same time. So that's one of the differences. And I would say like the older style button sticking out here looks, well, older style. So I like the newer one, the themed TK button, better. In this video, we looked at the grid layout manager. This is probably the most important layout manager that TK-Enter has. We arrange buttons next to each other and below one another and sideways. And we could see that they automatically align within the grid cell. And we can use a sticky property to keep them, to prevent them from getting center aligned when another widget gets bigger than it was originally. And in the end, we also looked at the difference between creating a TK button and a TTK button. And in the next video, we will be creating and reading entry widgets.